Okay. Cooperative Legacy Project interview number 67, March 16th, 2007. We're visiting with Dakota Energy Cooperative manager and 2006 inductee into the South Dakota Co-op Hall of Fame, Bob Rademacher. Bob, where and when were you born?
I was born in a farmhouse near Clayton, South Dakota in 1940.
Okay, where's Clayton at?
Clayton is about 15 miles south of Emory, South Dakota.
Okay.
Hutchinson County.
When did your family originally settle in that area?
My grandmother her parents, I'm trying to think now, it was her parents actually, when they first came into the Dakota Territory, they lived in a cave or a dugout. They dug a hole on the side of the mountain or the side of the hill, and lived in the dugout the first winter, and then the next year they built a mud house, which part of it's still there.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And where were they originally from? Rademacher, is that...
Well, we don't really know that for sure. We know that they spent a lot of time in Hinton, Iowa, and we're trying to find out where they actually landed. And right now we're thinking, and we want to make a trip over there. There is a county on the Illinois border in Iowa that is called Clayton County. And we have found some stuff that indicates that they may have settled originally in Clayton County in Iowa. So, but we don't know that. Yeah.
Okay. What was your father's name?
George.
Want to talk about him a little bit? What sort of a person was he?
Well, my dad was a constant worker. He worked all day, all night. He was one of the few farmers in his area that saved his farm in the 30s, and he had a team of horses, and he worked road construction with his horses, and he stacked what do they call that burning bush in the barn.
Tumbleweeds?
Yeah, before they become tumbleweeds.
Oh, okay.
He cut them down and put them in the barn to feed his cattle during the winter, and of course at that time thievery was, nobody had anything, so thievery was big time. So the wheat that he gathered off of what was an old lake bed where he planted the wheat, they stored that in the living room.
Whoa.
And
I'll be darned.
And of course the house is still sitting there. It was a big house. I mean, it was a huge house. It had actually had a basement and 3 full stories. And so, he worked hard. He, of course, was township board, school board, church board, and was actually president of the, I'm not exactly sure the name it was. I think it was Freeman Cooperative Gas and Oil or something like that. For years he was on that board. And I don't know, that was his cooperative thing.
Okay. What was your mother's name?
Alvina.
Want to talk about her?
Well, she was a typical housewife in that era, helped out in the farm when she was needed, and of course my dad had a thrashing crew. They went from place to place to thrash, and she cooked and
cook car along with the crew?
What's that?
A cook car along with the
actually she hauled it out in an old Model A. She cooked it at home.
Oh, okay.
And hauled it out to the fields in a Model A.
Were they using a tractor in those days with the thrashing machine?
Yeah, the thrashing machine was run with tractor, but there were, as I can remember as a kid, when I started out, we used horses, and of course, the horses were trained where, as they went down the row of bundles or shocks, they knew just how fast to go. And of course they were stop, go, and of course my dad also picked corn by hand for years. I don't remember when he got his first corn picker, but the horses, of course, did the same thing when he was picking corn, and he had a little device, and I suppose they all did at that time, that had a little hook. There was a glove that had a little hook on it, and that's how they cut the cob away, for the corn cob away from the shock, or from the stalk, and had a bang board, so they on the one side of the wagon, so they didn't have to worry about throwing it over the other side.
Did he ever participate in the corn picking championships or something? I know they've held those in South Dakota.
Yeah, not that I know of. I know that he'd like the number of kernels per ear and stuff like that. We still got ribbons where he had the biggest ear and the most kernels per ear and stuff like that.
Okay. You have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother and one sister.
Okay. What are their names?
My brother is Otto, and my sister is Brigitta. And my brother runs a business in Sioux City, and my sister and her husband, Larry Hofer, live on a farm near Dolton.
Okay. Nobody took over the family farm down there, though?
My dad said he would not let us do that. My brother, we all had to go to college, and he said nobody has to work as hard as I've had to work.
Fairly common attitude for farmers in those days.
Yeah, he would not even consider letting us be on the farm.
Yeah. What are some of your earliest memories on the farm?
Well, I can barely remember. I had an uncle that was in the war, World War II, and that's kind of my first remembrance on the farm. I can remember back to when my mother had a sister in Montana, and I remember getting on the train with her in Parkston, and we took the train to Aberdeen, and then we switched trains at Aberdeen and went to a town in Montana, was Ringling, Montana, where my aunt picked us up, and I know I was pretty young because the train had a lot of soldiers on it, and of course they, I thought soldiers were great, and so I spent time with them. But as far as on the farm, I'm not exactly sure how old I was, but when my dad had did the thrashing, I was out there, and probably more so because I wanted to be than have to be. And it was my job to make sure that the grain didn't run over the edge of the wagons. I moved the spout back and forth in the wagons to make sure. And I had to be pretty young, and I know that I think I was probably 8 when my dad, again, probably let me cultivate. And the first time, of course, you cultivated 3 times in those days. And the first time you barely moved because the corn was really small. And I know that I cultivated, I was really young when I first cultivated. And then, of course, when we got our combine, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm thinking it was 1949 or 1950. But I remember driving the tractor, and that would have made me 9 years old, probably. And I wasn't big enough. I had a B John Deere, and I wasn't big enough to pull the clutch handle back. So my dad, who ran the binder, he sat on the binder, and he had a rope tied to that clutch handle. And of course, when something went wrong, he would stop the tractor. And of course, when you're in front looking straight ahead and all of a sudden the tractor stopped, the next thing you knew, you were peeling yourself off of the steering wheel. So that's kind of my earliest memories. And like I say, I remember, thrashing and cultivating and running the binder and the tractor for the binder.
Was obviously quite a bit different in those days than it is today.
Well, that's true. There's no question about that.
Yeah. But it was a relatively positive period for farmers as far as income.
Well, yeah. After the war, of course, prices went up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, I remember the joy of my dad to, you know, when we got a good amount of money per bushel and for corn, and of course my toys in those days were sardines cans and we had a wooden cheese box. That was my semi. And I remember when we sold that corn, of course in those days you shelled it, you know, you had a sheller come in and shell the corn, and my dad was so happy with the price he let me buy a toy John Deere tractor, and that was, I think I slept with that tractor for a week.
You still have it?
No, but I have a replica.
Okay, I see.
But it's an A. That's an A. I didn't get a B.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Did your folks talk much about what things had been like during the 1930s?
Not that I remember, no. Not that I remember. Okay. I know that, you know, one of the things, you know, they lived off of, and of course pheasants were plentiful in those days. And my dad would go get pheasants, and I don't know if there was a limit or what it was, but my mother canned a lot of pheasants. We ate a lot of canned pheasants. She canned them, and but that was kind of our, you know, or I guess that was their meal. I don't know that, but I mean, we you know, even after, you know, we had beef and pork and chicken, Mother would still can some pheasant. It wasn't like, I guess that's what they had when they, in the 30s. Yeah. Because they got married in 1930. No, 32.
Okay.
I don't remember now for sure. It was 30 or 32.
Okay. When you were young, what did you want to do? Was your dad already telling you then he didn't want you to farm?
Oh yeah. That was never any question. And actually, when I graduated from high school, I could have gone on the farm with him, but I still had to go to college, and so, you know, the only two things I'd done in life was either work on the farm or go to school. So it looked to me like being a teacher was the thing I was going to have to be. So I didn't, you know, lawyers and doctors and all that stuff was. I mean, they were on a different level than I was raised at, and so I never even thought of being those things. I mean, that's.
I'm guessing you didn't have electricity on the farm. Would that be right?
No, that's correct. I remember when we got electricity, and you know, it was. I always say that I got a little, I have like a little wart right in the middle of my thumb. I always said that came from pumping that gas lantern, because, you know, we had a steady, and we played a lot of cards. We would had a battery radio, and we listened to Edward R. Murrow, and then the Lone Ranger, and then we'd play cards, or study and play cards, and I'm thinking when I was 15 when we finally got electricity. We were kind of on the end of things. And,
there's a lot of places that got electricity before that.
Oh yeah. And I remember the electrician had it's a deal. You just turn a bulb into a I don't know what it was, ceramic deal or something, and then you just plugged it in, and that was, I mean, we had electricity in the house, but that was the only light we had. And the first thing my dad bought was a refrigerator. And the refrigerator doors opened the wrong way for where we could put it. So my dad bought a Philco refrigerator, and it had like a V handle right in the middle of it. If you pulled it one way, it opened this way, and if you pulled the handle down the other way, it opened it that way. And I'd love to have that refrigerator today. I don't know whatever happened to it, but that was a unique refrigerator. but you could open the door either way.
Yep. Did many farms down there have Delco systems? I've been surprised how many people I've talked to that had some minimal electricity before.
Yeah. No, I do not know of anybody in our area that had that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Would that make quite an impression on you when you got electricity?
Well, I'd already spent a year in high school,
mm-hmm.
and I was very familiar with electricity. And of course, we didn't have running water.
Yeah.
And so that was a real delight for me to go out for sports and be able to take a shower.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pretty well acquainted with those modern things.
mm-hmm. Did you go to country school?
Yeah. 8 years.
Okay. Remember the name of the school?
Kepsch. Kapschch. Kepsch School District number 48.
Okay. What was that like? Was it a fairly good education?
Well, I've always said I went to grade school for 64 years. I had, 8 years and 8 classes every day in a single room. You had to have every,
mm-hmm.
So you went through all the grades every year.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Remedial, even if you didn't need it.
Yeah, it was, and we had as many as 22 kids. I mean, that was the high that I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
And
2 or 3 per class.
Yeah, of course, I had a big class. I had anywhere from 6 to 8. We had a big class, all boys.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, of course, I've think back to those days, and I think one of the things that I think about is this poor teacher, because we were all farm kids. In those days, you had basically maybe had 1 pair of shoes, 2 if your feet didn't grow too fast. But these were the same shoes that you wore to do chores, and the same shoes that you wore to school. And of course, when the teacher would get there early, and of course she would stoke up the furnace, which was a floor heat. And then of course when the kids would come, we'd all stand on that furnace. Well, most of us had done chores and been out in the manure, and I can't believe how bad that room must have smelled. That poor teacher had to put up with that smell. It had to be awful. I mean, it was. Or she was a farm lady too. Well, not always. So that had to be a test of really wanting to teach, to go through that smell every day in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. I interviewed one guy where they had a family of skunks living under their school.
And of course, see, I was in grade school when George Sitz was on the loose.
Mm.
And
who's he now?
George Sitz is the first guy that got the electric chair in South Dakota.
Oh.
And nobody knew where he was,
Okay.
And anyway, when the teacher came to school, she saw we had an attic above the school, and of course we had like 12-foot walls, I guess. But anyway, there were black marks on the wall close to where this attic door was.
Oh.
And of course, she immediately thought George Sitz was up there, and my dad was on the school board, and so they wouldn't let us. We didn't dare go into the school, and I don't remember if they called the sheriff or not, but evidently I don't remember what all happened. We may have had to go home. I just don't remember anymore. But I remember that we were out of school for a while because George Sitz might have been in our attic.
Apparently he wasn't.
Well, yeah, he was. They found him in Deadwood, which was a long ways from where our school was at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. What about high school? Where did you go to high school?
I started in Freeman and went there 2 years, and then I ended up. Then my brother graduated from college. He got a job in Scotland, and so then, because we lived 16 miles from town.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I lived with him, and I graduated from Scotland High School.
Oh, okay. Okay. What was that like? Was it kind of a lot? Some rural kids were kind of shocked to go and suddenly have a big school with a lot of kids as opposed to a smaller.
Well, I don't know that was ever a problem for me. I know that I thoroughly enjoyed going to school in Scotland. I mean, there was more kids that had my same interest, and it was a big transition for me. But being in sports and athletics, I never had any problem as far as kids are concerned.
Yeah, had an opportunity to play on a team then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Were your parents active in any rural organizations down there?
I can't remember that they were.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know my uncle Art Stern was.
Yeah.
And of course he just lived a mile from us, and like I said earlier, I know that he was on the board of the South Dakota Farmers Union.
Mm-hmm.
And see, my dad was. Well, after war was over, he was 45 years old already, and because he was born in 1899, so I don't imagine that going to meetings outside of the co-op and the school board and the township, he probably figured that was enough. I don't know, but no, he didn't get involved.
And you already said he worked pretty hard continually.
Well, his day started when the sun came up and ended when the sun went down. And, of course, as a kid, that's the way I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
You went to work when the sun came up. That was it.
Where did you attend college at then?
I graduated from University of South Dakota, Springfield.
Okay. How many kids were there down there at that time?
Well, I just can't remember for sure, but it seems to me that they were pushing for an enrollment of about 700, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
Maybe it was 400. I don't. Okay. I remember there was a drive on it. They all asked us to go out and recruit because they wanted to get to some number. I don't know what it was.
Okay. What did you major in?
Education. Yeah.
Okay.
Had a double major in social sciences and math.
Mm-hmm. Did you play on any teams down there?
No.
Okay. Was it difficult later on when Janklow closed the school?
Well, I'm not sure that. I'm not sure about the closing of the school, but I really think the part that got left out was the fact that the thing that came out of Springfield were the teachers that taught industrial arts, taught mechanics, and went into the vocational schools. And I know from being on the school board at Huron that that was always a very difficult position for us to fill because the teachers weren't available.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't enough of them, and I think that's something that he took away. Whether if they'd taken it and moved it someplace else, it'd probably been okay too. I know the other colleges have some of that, but that was not the emphasis as it was at Springfield.
Yeah.
That was the emphasis too for the industrial arts,
mm-hmm.
and they had a tremendous program down there too. Really good teachers, and it was. I don't know about the decision about closing it, but that's one part I felt that got left behind.
Mm-hmm. Do they get into that a bit at the Votech schools now?
Well, the Votechs basically, they teach people to do a job. And,
yeah.
But they don't
but
have.
They're still minus those kind of teachers for school the school systems.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Did you serve in the military?
No, I did not.
You were kind of in that
I got caught
in-between era?
Right in the middle.
Yeah.
In fact, a friend of mine and I, we volunteered for the draft,
Mm-hmm.
and but we never even got drafted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They probably weren't drafting an awful lot of people in the mid-50s, were they?
Well,
To the extent that they did later on during the Vietnam War.
yeah, well, Hutchinson County, I think, had one a month.
Mm-hmm.
And they had kind of a little deal. If you got in trouble, sometimes, as I remember it, I'd have to check the facts on this, but if I remember right, if you got in a little trouble, you moved up in the draft list.
Okay. Did you have to pay attention to your grade point when you were in school? Or was a college deferment just a given in those days, in between?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah. It may have been a Vietnam situation later on.
Oh yeah,
People had to worry about keeping their grade point up.
Yeah, well, when I was when I was teaching, one of the things I taught was American history, and of course, we always spent one day a week on current events.
Mm-hmm.
And the current event at that time was the negotiations that were going on with the federal government and Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Say, and so there was no, that war wasn't even on yet, and I don't remember this for sure, but it seems to me that I kind of remember that Kennedy had sent advisors over, military advisors or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of what I remember. But yeah, so everything was kind of over with.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing going on. A little crisis in Lebanon. In fact, I had a friend that I taught with that actually was in the service, and because of the problems in Lebanon, I don't even remember what those were, but they extended him a year, and of course that would have meant that they took, they were keeping the military full by extending them,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
but I don't remember much about what was going on in those days, even though I guess there just wasn't anything really.
Yeah, the Cold War kind of.
Yeah, it was the Cold
progressing,
War
but,
thing.
but
Yeah,
not any hot spots.
we had still, we had the Iron Curtain,
Mm-hmm.
and people were still, some people were still building bomb shelters. And
Where did you first teach school at?
Bonesdale, South Dakota.
Okay, down in
Gregory County. Yeah. Was there 4 years, and then the fifth year was at Dubrook. The first year it was a consolidated school between Toronto and White.
Okay, was that one of the earlier consolidated schools in South Dakota?
I don't know that.
Okay. When did you meet your wife?
Actually, we met in college.
College.
Yeah.
Okay. What's her name?
Jean.
Okay.
Jean.
Mm-hmm. And when did you get married?
1962.
Okay. Kids?
Yeah, I have, my oldest is a daughter, and she's a graduate of South Dakota State, and she works for Center of Independence here in Huron.
Mm-hmm.
And my oldest son was Doug. Doug had a heart attack at 32 and died. And my youngest son is a graduate of USD and got his master's from Penn State, and works for UBS and lives in Zurich, Switzerland.
Mm. Grandchildren?
Just two.
Two.
Yeah.
Okay. When did you first go to work for Rural Electric?
Actually, I started in the summer. Let me think a second. 68. Let's see, 62, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Summer of 1967, I started at Turner Hutchison Electric in Marion, South Dakota, working on the tree trimming crew.
Okay.
And at the same time, I had applied for a position with Rosebud Electric at Gregory,
Mm-hmm.
which was the electrification advisor, which, and it wasn't shortly, I wasn't there very long because I was a good friend of a fellow by the name of Frank Stork, who was working for the South Dakota Rural Electric Association, and Frank left, and he recommended to Tom Fennell that he hire me to replace him, and so then I went to work for South Dakota Rural Electric Association as member services, and
Okay.
that's how I started.
All right. Who was the first manager you had? That would have been down at Marion, I suppose?
Well, yeah, Nelson, Jeff Nelson's dad. I can't remember what his name is.
Okay.
But Roy Lutz is really the guy that gave me a full-time position in the program.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Roy
And
Lutz.
you mentioned Tom. He was...
Well, actually, yeah, I worked for Tom, but Robert Ford was the statewide manager.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Were the folks... well, by that time, people were pretty comfortable with electricity. They had had it for quite a while.
Oh yeah, when I was with statewide, of course, we that was the big promotion area. People were just starting to, everybody had a propane bottle tank at those days to run their range and their dryers,
Mm-hmm.
and so we ran a lot of promotions for electric ranges. Frost-free refrigerators came in, dryers came in, and we worked with a lot of the appliance distributors and dealers in South Dakota to promote the use of that equipment.
Mm-hmm. I interviewed one former manager who talked about having early on run into people who were selling wind chargers and were tried to scare rural people with the idea how dangerous electricity might be. Did you ever hear of anything like that in the areas where you were at?
No, I didn't. But I was flying on an airplane one day, and I sat and talked to this lady, and who was sitting next to me, just like you do on a plane conversation, nothing too
Mm-hmm.
serious. And I told her I worked for the Rural Electrics, and she said, well, the Rural Electrics put my dad out of business. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but what did he do? And she said, well, he sold wind chargers.
Okay, where was he from?
I don't know where. I have no
Okay.
idea. I have no idea.
All right.
So that was my first exposure to that problem.
Yeah. Okay.
But you take the history of electricity. When Edison and Westinghouse were trying to electrify the United States, that was a big war, whether it was DC current or AC current.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember which one it was anymore, but one of them took a bed spring, and used to have those old bed springs, and hooked AC current through it and threw a dog on it, and of course killed it, and told people how dangerous that AC current was.
Now, I remember hearing just recently on public radio somebody saying that Edison, when he made available the first electric chair, he wanted to, instead of having an electric chair, he wanted to say that the guy had been Westinghoused.
Well, so Westinghouse must have been AC then.
Yes.
Yeah. But that was a big battle in those days. In fact, where I read that was when I read a history on, because I read a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
and it was a history on capital punishment in the United States.
Oh.
That's where I read that.
All right. Let's see here. What exactly were you doing as member services director in those days?
Well, actually, when I worked for Rosebud Electric, I basically helped people to advise people as to different types of hookups.
They were still probably expanding from their original wiring.
Yeah, and of course the state inspection program wasn't that big, so I did a lot of inspecting, especially in a hookup of dryers and water heaters, because they had to be fused properly and wired size was right, and of course people would call me and say, what do we need to, kind of what size wire, and then of course we got into electric heat, and that was a whole new ballgame.
Yeah.
That was a whole new ballgame, and of course, everybody was used to using a 60 amp fuse box that had pull-out fuses and 4 little fuses across the bottom, and now all of a sudden they had to have big electrical boxes and in order to do electric heat, and of course electric heat really took off. People went for it.
Yep. When did you start here in Eagle County?
1972.
Okay.
September of 72. I started out as member service director, which was what electrification advisor got changed to, and of course the difference between this and Rosebud was that we actually had a wiring department here. We wired, and I still do today. And so, of course, I had to run the wiring department and at the same time promote electricity and especially the safety of it. That's a lot of people did their own wiring, and if they could get the current to flow, that was good enough. Not really concern themselves with the safety of it. And of course, still today that's a big issue is to safety. But spent a lot of time on electric heat, and of course we had the first what's called water-to-air heat pump, and remember working with that and taking a lot of readings and see if that was going to go to work, and of course air-to-air heat pumps were popular at that time, and of course today, I don't know, I would guess probably 25% of our customers have either electric heat pump or air-to-air or either water-to-air heat pump, because water works good in this area.
Okay. Who was the manager here when you started?
Burl Rathman.
Okay.
And then he retired in 83, and then I became the manager in 1983.
Okay. What sort of issues were you dealing with in the early 1970s? You talked about the process of getting people hooked up for electric heat. Beyond that, did you have any problems with the issue of territorial integrity?
Well, yeah, that was an issue, and I got in right when the state legislature, of course, when I was at Statewide, when we had the famous House Bill 548 fight. Well, then when I started here,
you want to describe that fight?
At 548?
Yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of stories written about 548, and being in the middle of it, I have a lot of different conception of that whole thing than some of the people that have written about it, and so I just as soon let their stories stand.
Okay.
But I guess the thing that I remember the most of it is the fact that one of our people told Governor Farrar that we're gonna put this thing on the ballot, and we're going out and get people to sign petitions to put it on the ballot, and we're going to have more names on those petitions than you had votes. And we did. I remember that. Now, of course, that was a big deal with the petitions, anyway, like I say, then of course, then the legislature, of course, passed the territorial bill, and so then I got involved in the mapping and setting up the territories.
Okay.
For Dakota Energy. I didn't have any, say as to what they should be, but I did, worked on the maps.
Mm-hmm. Was there still any problem around some of the larger communities where maybe I think somebody told me that down around Sioux Falls, they like to try to persuade the city government to extend the city limits, and then when there was going to be some development that would be outside the investor-owned utilities territory?
Well, I don't think Sioux Falls is a problem, but there are towns that have municipals that have really, I think, in my opinion, extended themselves beyond what the law really says. When they start annexing bare ground, that's not what the territorial law is about. And they what goes around comes around, and they just need to be ready when it comes around.
Before you became manager, did you go along on any of the Washington trips, the lobbying trips, NRACA stuff?
I've been to Washington so many times I can't tell you when I started. Not one of my favorite places, I can tell you that.
Okay. Any particular experiences there that you'd want to mention?
In Washington?
Yeah. That stand out as something that you liked or didn't like?
I could tell you one, but we wouldn't want to record it. But I think I'll tell you the thing that I enjoyed when I went in, I headed a group. And when we'd visit with either representatives, mostly representatives from California or New York, who had no idea what the rural electric program was about, had no idea what rural was about. I mean, they were, if they were in New York City, I mean, they were well versed on that area, but probably outside of going to Washington, really never been out of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I remember visiting with a representative from San Diego who was a nice guy, great guy, but his concern was docks, harbors, fishing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he was concerned about.
Did they know what a cooperative was?
I can't say that I ever run into anybody that didn't.
Okay.
Yeah. But New York City people were well acquainted with.
They had housing cooperatives.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they knew what cooperatives were.
Okay.
But I'm not sure they knew that they existed outside of that housing cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
But never run into that they didn't know.
Did you, when you started managing, did you have anybody in the rural electric movement that you'd kind of watched, you kind of used as a role model for how to be a successful manager?
All of them. I mean, that's, to me, it's. I mean, I'm a real believer in you don't reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd call one manager and say, "Hey, here's what I got. How do I handle this?" And if they didn't know, they knew somebody who had.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, it's kind of interesting. I see these young managers come on and they try to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
All they have to do is call somebody who's been there and tell them how to do it, what to do, or say, forget it, it isn't going to work, or, yeah, great idea, go for it, And it's like I say, I guess probably my number one mentor was Lloyd Olson, who was the manager at Mitchell with Intercounty. He was probably my main mentor, yeah. But I used them all. And that's how I succeeded, was because of the advice they gave me.
Okay. Did you have any specific philosophy in managing your employees?
Well, I do. Yeah, I have a lot of philosophies. A lot of people wouldn't agree with my philosophy, but For one thing, we really don't have any rules as far as employees are concerned. I mean, we got the normal policies on medical insurance and vacation and all that, and I just basically tell my people, look, I hired you as a responsible adult. I expect that you'll act like a responsible adult, and that's the way I'll treat you. And I basically have not had any problems with my employees.
Okay. When did you and the board of directors start thinking about the possibility of mergers? That kind of is a...
Well,
how many have you had here? It's just...
Well, we just had the one but
with...
actually it goes back quite a ways. I had a board president. I mean, I've had several board presidents, but I mean, and all good ones. And I've been blessed with absolute superb board of directors ever since I've been manager. Mm-hmm. But I had one director who was very, very aggressive, and he talked mergers constantly. And in fact, at one time we had we worked to put together Cooperative of Mitchell, Salem, and DeSmit. Mm-hmm. And, of course, it fell apart, and then we kind of laid back a little while, and then, of course, we knew Ree was going to do something, but they favored to go with Oahe, and, of course, that fell apart, and that's when we came in, and I managed for a year at Ree Electric before we merged.
Oh, okay. Was that a reluctant thing for them? Did they view that as that they were going to be losing something from their community then out there?
Well, I don't think so. When you talk about mergers, mm-hmm. You actually got to go through 5 groups to have a successful merger. And the most amazing thing is that the last one in the group is the one that's going to benefit the most, which is the member. Mm-hmm. But if you don't, the first thing you got to have is a manager who believes that this is going to work. Then you got to have a board. Mm-hmm. Then you got to have your employees, and then you got to have your communities, and then you got to have your members. And before you get to the member, you got to get through those first 4. Mm-hmm. But when it's all done, the one that benefits the most is the member. Yeah. And I can say that when the 2 boards got together and they first visited, and I told them all the same thing. I said, "Look, this is a process that I don't want to go through unless you are really sincere about doing it. Mm-hmm. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, and halfway through, somebody or one of the boards decides that we don't really want to do this. We need to have a total commitment. Mm-hmm. And when you make that total commitment, it's got to be 100% the board. Because we're not going to spend a lot of time on this if we don't have that." And we did have, and I still am amazed how well it went, because at that particular time when we started, I had the president, Miller, or the Ree, one of Ree's directors was the president of Basin Electric, mm-hmm. and Beale Electric had the president of East River Electric. Yep. And
it was
Ed Fritzie.
And George Hardin?
George Hardin, yeah. And both great leaders, but the possibility existed that one of them wasn't going to be a leader anymore. Yeah. And when we merged, Ed retired, which he had planned to do, and then of course George stayed on for a few more years and finished his career as the president of Basin Electric.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, I can say that through this whole process that we went through, dealing with 18 people, that I absolutely can't remember that there was ever any negativism on any issue at the table.
Mm-hmm.
I
what
mean,
was the year that happened in?
1995.
95. Okay.
Yeah.
There have been some other mergers around the state.
No, we were the first.
You were the first.
Yeah, we were the first.
Okay. Did you kind of set a template for some of the other? Did they come to you and say, "How did you do that?"
Well, that's kind of interesting. Some did, some didn't. But as I just recently made a presentation out statewide, I said, I was more of an authority outside the state than I was within the state.
Well, you talked about some of these managers reinventing the wheel.
Yeah. So I think I'm not sure, but I think I've been to 8 different states and put on presentations on merging or consolidating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You think the process of merging rural electric co-ops is substantially different than, say, merging cooperative oil companies or cooperative elevators?
I can't answer that. I really don't know. I really don't know.
Okay. You've been a supporter of renewable energy.
Oh yes.
Of course, you've got the
wind farm in Highmark.
Mills, the wind farm out there.
Yeah. It definitely. Yeah.
How do you see the future of that in South Dakota?
Well, it's kind of interesting. The wind issue is not only in South Dakota. No. In fact, I just got a couple emails. One of them's in Texas, and one of them was from Iowa, and there's a lot of prospectors out there. I compare it to 1849 when all the prospectors went to California to find gold. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of prospectors out there trying to figure out how to get in on making money with wind energy. Mm-hmm. I mean, so there'll be some that survive, and eventually you'll have it. Mm-hmm. But you got to go through that sorting stage.
Yeah. Do you see getting some means of moving that power to other parts of the country as a pretty significant step in the process?
Well, that's of course one of the problems that exists in South Dakota is that in order to move the wind energy out of South Dakota, you're going to have to move it to an area where they need electricity, and of course, we that's not a problem in South Dakota, is having enough electricity,
mm-hmm. Or price even.
Or even price, yeah. But I've always said the prices of electricity was kind of like a saucer, Put New York on one side of the saucer and California on the other side of the saucer, and you come through the Midwest, you got the bottom, and that's kind of the way the price is. But I think that saucer is going to turn into a plate pretty quick.
Okay. How about the partnership with Florida Power and Light? Was that a kind of a new experience working with an investor-owned utility?
Well, of course, I've had a lot of experience working with an investor-owned utility, being here in Northwestern, being here in Huron, but I cannot say a negative thing about Florida Power and Light. They were absolutely excellent partners. Mm-hmm. They were absolutely excellent partners. And if I had to choose, if I was going to be in another wind project and I had to have to select a partner, I would pick them again. Mm-hmm. They just did a great job.
Okay. One of the things that you notice if you talk to a lot of rural electric people, not everybody in the rural electric movement is so supportive of wind energy. Have you run into any of those kind of folks who are like kind of dubious of the value of it?
Well, I had an old boy tell me one time, if you stood in a corner, he said, 5% of the people are going to be against anything. He said, if you stood on a corner and you handed out $100 bills, you'd have five of them, you had 100 of them, you'd have 5 of them wouldn't take them.
Yeah.
And, But to me, I think it'd be very short-sighted of them if they were dubious of wind energy. I mean, I just feel that, the thing about it, it's got to develop. It's a lot of people would like to compare it to a light switch on the wall. You go turn on the light, and the light comes, or switch, and the light comes on. Well, that's not the way it works when you start producing energy. That takes time. And there's so many feasibilities that have to be accomplished, and the first thing you got to have is you got to have a customer. That's the key. You got to have a customer. And even if you got the transmission, if you don't have a customer, what good is it for you?
Okay. You have also served on the board, at least what I see here is the board of directors of the Federated Rural Electric Insurance Corporation.
That's correct.
What do they do?
They insure rural electric utilities and used to do telephones, but telephone has kind of left the Federated insurance, and I mean they know our business, they know what insurance we need, and it's that's their business. I mean, they insure rural electric cooperatives, and I can tell you this much, which is I always, if I got a feather in my hat, that's one of them, is the fact that we changed while I was on the board. Federated Rural Electric Exchange from a company into a cooperative. That was a big issue, big time. And so today, now we are, instead of paying our premium into an insurance company, and that was the end of it, we now pay our premiums into a cooperative, and every year we get some capital credits and get some assigned. And so pretty proud of that.
The cooperative system really works.
Yeah, it worked very, very well. Yeah.
Over the years, this area has had a lot of damaging storms. Particularly, I remember one just recently here, just a little over a year ago. Yeah. You want to talk about the process of dealing with those things?
Well, I can tell you, prior to the 95 storm, prior to 95, I never went to bed where I didn't have every person on that had electricity. In 95, we went 14 days, and 05, we went 17 days. And I'll tell you, I did sleep. I mean, not very much, but I did sleep.
Yep.
But, the thing about one of those storms, when you get into it, when you get into one of those, you take on a completely different personality, because you can't deal like you normally deal. I mean, we had between 125 and 175 people in here. We had 50 to 60 trucks. These people got to be fed. They got to be, you got to have places for them to stay at night. You got to, constantly you got to have tires, and something's always breaking, and you got to have material. And I mean, your mind, you get so involved in this that you kind of forget about the rest of the world. You kind of really lose those days when you have that kind of a deal.
Yep.
You just change total personality. I mean, it really does. And of course, we were one of the co-ops in both storms that got hit the hardest.
Yep.
Somebody always was worse, but it wasn't the same. But we were right there, and. It's kind of hard to describe, and once you get through it, you just kind of your mind goes away from it again. It's kind of they always say that people forget about bad things. Well, you kind of forget about what you went through. You really do. I mean, I can't describe it, but you know, we the thing that you know, I to me that still is the most appreciative, even though we had all these people in, they send their people. But I guess the thing that I was so much more appreciative is the help that we got from the city of Huron. Not the city of Huron, but the merchants in Huron. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they worked with us in motel rooms, and of course, you know, you got guys leaving and coming, and you know, they'd open up their places so our guys could get breakfast. We could get gas any time of the night. They'd open up their places. They'd fix tires at night. They'd overhaul trucks or whatever it had to be. I mean, they did this at night when our crews, you know, were resting and getting ready to go out the next day. And you know, we had the soda vendors brought out machines. They brought water and pop out here all the time for us. We had you know, the food they'd bring out here, which we put into sandwiches and sacked. People came from town to help us sack the lunches. We had Rod Boyd at that time. He brought us out, but we didn't have the communications in '95 that we had in '05, and he brought out cell phones that we could give to trucks so we could talk to them, and this gave to us. Danny Hofer flew me around the system to see how bad it was. I mean, it was just unbelievable, the help we got. It you know, it just made everything so much easier when, you know, they were this so well. And the call, you know, we get a lot of calls from merchants, you know, say, what can we do? Or can we help? We even had a bank in town who said, hey, you guys need to have some cash. We'll borrow you the money.
Mm-hmm. Were all the patrons understanding all the time of, you know, why they may be in the latter part of getting reconnected?
Well, I go back to that 5% again. Yeah, and that was the thing, you know. All they had to do was step outside and see it, you know. And you know, they were in the '05 storm. I mean, which was the worst one. I think that you know, it happened just between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and when they looked out and saw what was down, they didn't think they were going to have power before Christmas. And when we got it on, I think it was, I don't remember the last day anymore, it was the 14th or 15th of December. Mm-hmm. They were just absolutely pleased to no end. Sure. But we got, I don't know, hundreds of letters thanking us for what we did, and the food. They'd bring us food. The guys be out working, and they'd have food and water and pop, and the farmers would get their tractors out and open up the roads and pull the trucks out of the ditch. And I mean, it just, the whole community just went together. I mean, it's just unbelievable, you know. And most of the time, we didn't have to ask. If we were in an area working, there'd be farmers sitting there with their tractor to help. You know, the county, they couldn't. The state. Well, in fact, Governor Rounds was here 3 times, you know, to help us, and got us lined up with the state radio so we could use the state radio system. And the National Guard came in and brought their big 8-wheel drive units in to pull us out. And in Janklow when Janklow was governor, the first one he was here. I mean, so even the state was, the state helped us immensely.
When you first went to work down at Rosebud, Basin Electric was being established. That's a continuing kind of a thing for the rural electrics. You want to comment a little bit on the association and the importance of Basin?
Well, of course, you know, when Beale Electric got started, they bought their power from Northwestern. And, of course, Northwestern, you know, the rural electrics were growing, and, of course, pretty soon we were using up more than they could sell, and so they basically said, we just can't provide you anymore. But then the dams were done. Well, of course, the studies showed that the power produced from the dams wasn't going to last very long, and of course, so that's when Basin was created. And Virgil Hanlon, who to me was an amazing individual. To have the foresight that man had is just unbelievable, and to have created, well, first of all, East River, and then being part of creating Basin, and I'm sure even in his wildest dreams he didn't expect Basin to be what it is today. That's tremendous asset to the rural communities. There's just no question about that. Not the communities, but to the rural electric members, is to have a basin where we can buy affordable electricity.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the current, I guess it's almost a debate as to whether to build coal-fired plants or not. I know Basin has discussed building one here in South Dakota. That I think for a little while, at least, there was some discussion of possibly locating it near Huron here.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to really answer that. And I guess I've never been concerned about nuclear, and nuclear. If people are worried about pollution, that's which is these coal generating plants. They got scrubbers on it and stuff like that. Pretty much, they got a handle on that stuff, but yet people are also, they don't want nuclear. So somewhere somebody's got to give, and I don't know who it's going to be, but I won't be involved.
How do you see demand increasing around here for electricity? You're now serving the new turkey plant here, is that
right?
Yeah.
Dakota Provisions, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we just did our forecast, and it's been kind of amazing the growth that we've received. We sold over 100 million kilowatt hours for the first time in the history of the co-op during 06.
Okay.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we increase that by 20% this next year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Here's a question that I guess I've asked other folks. Do you think rural people would have gotten electricity delivered to them if it had not been for the rural electric program? Do you think the private utilities would have been interested ultimately in bringing power to rural areas?
No, I don't think so. I really don't think they would have.
Mm-hmm.
They may have expanded a little bit from their lines, maybe a little further, but I don't think it would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't.
Mm-hmm. At least areas where they could see a profit, but not to that guy way out on the end of the line in a rural area.
Yeah, well, and I know what the investment is.
Mm-hmm.
I know the return on a mile of line.
Yeah.
And when you got investors that support a company like you do an investor-owned utility, they have got to have some real profit in order to pay back their investment, and I can't see. I mean, as far as building the lines and all that probably would have been possible, but I don't think the investors in the company would have gone for that.
Mm-hmm.
I know they wouldn't have, because they want return on their dollars. That's what an investor-owned utility is all about.
Mm-hmm. As a result, largely of, well, certainly significantly of the rural electric program, life on the farm is radically different today than it was when you were a kid.
Well, that's right. Electricity is one of them, but actually there's two things that happened in the rural that made it easier, and one of them is the use of hydraulics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, between electricity and hydraulics, it just changed everything that farming's all about.
Sure.
I can remember my dad sitting on that binder, and in order to lift up the knife, just absolutely go through pain, pull that handle back. Where today, you push a button and it lifts it up.
Yep.
You know. So those two were the major changes in the agriculture. And of course, and you take today, the genetics of this corn and the grains is unbelievable. When we got, I remember we got 60 bushels an acre. That was the top of the line production. Today that same land's producing 120, 125 bushels an acre.
Yeah, we might not be able to be looking so much to the development of ethanol if we hadn't developed the varieties of corn that produce
exactly
yields to deal with that.
Yeah, I don't know the figures, but it'd be interesting to go back to the 60s and see what the production of corn was in South Dakota or eastern South Dakota compared to today.
Yeah,
and we haven't added any land.
Yeah, I think when I started around here, we figured 35, 40 bushels to the acre was what you'd get on dry land.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, I grew up in Hutchinson County, which gets a little bit more
better,
rain. Yeah.
But still not anywhere close to what it is today.
Yeah. Well, and they got the chemicals today. I mean, it was a war with weeds, and my brother and I walked acre and acre and acre picking cockleburs and chopping sunflowers. Just, today they don't even know what a cocklebur is.
Yes. Yeah. You've spent a lot of time working with cooperatives. What do you like about cooperatives as opposed to other forms of business? Obviously, the rural electric is probably one of the most successful forms that we can see out there.
Well, I think it's the people. I mean, when I moved from member services to manager, and even to this day, that's the thing I miss the most, is the fact that when I was in member services, I dealt with the people. I dealt with the member. I worked with the member, I knew them all by names. I knew their houses. I knew their farms. Sure. And that to me is, I talked to my member service director and said, yeah, well, over there in that shed, he's got this heater, or over in that barn, he's got a switch that he needs to replace. Yeah, it's just, that's the thing that, it's the people. That's, to me, is the most important.
How important is cooperative education for both the members and your staff?
Well, as far as my staff is concerned, that's pretty much that's a big part of them working here, is to understand and learn about cooperatives. The members, I think, as being a cooperative member of a rural electric, the benefits are much more visible than being of an oil company or something like that. And we spend a lot of hours talking about how do we explain to the young people who we are and what we are about. And nobody's really come up with a good solution yet. We talk about it, but like I say, and we do some things, but it's a tough issue, because those people just changed from the older days.
Yep.
When the young people today, and hey, I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying that this is the way it is. When they walk over to that switch and they turn it on, they expect the light to come on. The older people say, well, if it don't come on, well, maybe you have to call the co-op.
Yeah. So there's a tendency to take for granted that excellent service is going to be there.
Yes. But yet I can say during the storm, we didn't experience that at all. The young people were just as helpful and understanding as the older generation.
Expectations have a tendency to change over time. It seems like, for example, with the internet and the various broadband as opposed to dial-up, people suddenly what amazed them a few years ago, now they're impatient with, that they want everything to go faster.
Oh yeah. Well, I remember when we put in what we call ACH, where people pay their bill and would just tell us to take it out of their checking account.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that was ever. That was going to be just for a special few. And we got hundreds doing that now.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
They can send. We're still a self-read system. We're not going to be very long, but we still are.
Mm-hmm.
And they can go right to the computer, send us the reading, and we take it out of their checking account.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
There have been some moves in other. I don't think it's happened so much in South Dakota, but to privatize co-ops. You have any thoughts on that?
Not good ones.
Okay, well, that's what I want to hear.
Not good ones. Yes, I've heard all kinds of excuses about why they need to privatize, and I guess the only word I can think of is bullshit. I mean,
mm-hmm.
I can't think of another better word to describe it.
Yep. I interviewed a telephone co-op guy here last week, and he expressed some real thoughts on an adjoining co-op that had privatized.
Yeah. I don't know that we've had that in the rural electrics.
Yeah. How important is cooperation between cooperatives? That's pretty prevalent in the rural electric system, isn't it?
Well, I can tell you.
I mean, you all have your territory.
Yeah, I can tell you that from the time I started in this business to today, that's probably been my biggest disappointment, is that the erosion of the cooperation between cooperatives.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems that people have got their castle, and that's the only moat they want is the one that's around their castle.
Yeah.
And that's probably been my biggest disappointment, is to see the erosion of the cooperation that we've had between cooperatives.
Mm-hmm.
Not only in the rural electric, but between rural electric and gas and telephone and all those. We had rural electrics and telephones together in a lot of places, and still doing some,
mm-hmm.
but we all work together. That's not there anymore.
Yeah.
Or not as strong as it was when I started.
Have you thought of anything about what you'd like to do when you retire?
I have, but I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
I don't want to record it.
All right.
I know, in fact, I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Okay. You've been involved in a lot of other community activities. You want to talk about some of those?
No, I don't know. That's part of me.
Okay. Right.
But I've been on the school board, and I've been on
mm-hmm.
lots of different boards, and I mean they all got a good purpose, and hopefully while I was on them that I added to it, and
mm-hmm.
It's you need that. The communities need that. There's just no question about that. Sometimes people say, well, we don't need all these organizations, but I don't agree with that. I mean, how many noon clubs do we have in here? We got a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
Say, well, we got too many. I don't think so, because you get a group of people who have a certain interest,
mm-hmm.
And if they can get together at lunch and talk about it and do things,
Sure.
I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I don't think there's too many at all.
Okay. I guess you've addressed this a little bit, but challenges facing cooperatives have changed over the years. What seems like the biggest change to you?
Well, I think some of the things that never change is, when I got in the program, we had a fight immediately. I was in the fight of the Save the Rural Electric program, so that comes up every so often.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's always one president thinks we ought to sell the dams.
Yeah.
So I've always had that fight.
Yeah. As long as the federal deficit is as big as it is, somebody's going to get that idea every now and then.
And so we got to go through those wars. But I don't know. When you look into the future, I think one of the things that that disturbs me a little bit is the amount of money that we are spending on what are environmental concerns. Now, I don't think that's. I think we need to have environmental concerns, but how long are those concerns going to be positive when it's costing the people as much money as it is to do?
Mm-hmm.
How long is it going to be before the people say, I'm not paying for this anymore? We have spent millions and millions of dollars, and I think the one that probably disturbs me the most is the latitude that has been given to the Endangered Species Act,
mm-hmm.
where it just seems like they come up with just an idea and they go crazy over it and spend tons of money. And I'm looking at the prairie dogs,
Mm-hmm.
They're concerned about the demise of the prairie dog, and yet when I go from here into Rapid City, I see prairie dog town after prairie dog town, and and then I read about the polar bear, and they say, well, the story I read was that there's a big concern about the polar bears are starving to death because of the global warming, but when they go back. I think they say there's like 15,000 or something. But when they were healthy and not starving to death, there were only 5,000. Through the Endangered Species Act, from what I'm reading, I don't know this for a fact, that's what I'm reading, is that, they've increased, the polar bear population has increased to the point where the problem exists. If you want to take a look at another thing, look at the geese that fly over here. It's unreal. They just. I understand there's so many of them that they're actually destroying their habitat in Canada. The snow goose is.
Mm-hmm. There are probably more of them now than there certainly have been in the last 60 or 80 years.
Oh, by far.
Yeah.
See, and how long are people going to keep paying for that? That concerns me.
Mm-hmm.
I think. There's got to be a balance someplace as to, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I think there's got to be a balance as to what is really an endangered species.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what is a species as opposed to just a tiny variation on something.
Well, look at the money it's costing us for the sandpiper on the Missouri River when there's sandpipers all over the world.
Yep.
But we got to protect the ones on the Missouri River.
Mm-hmm. Would you describe yourself, and we're getting down to my last couple questions, an optimist or a pessimist?
Depends upon the issue.
Okay. Well, that's an honest answer. Almost everybody says, I'm an optimist, even though they've given me some pessimistic answers.
Well, I can be very optimistic and I can be very pessimistic.
Okay. Is there anything that I have not asked you that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. We've been visiting with Bob Rademacher. Thank you for participating in the Cooperative Legacy Project.